are you going to do now?
I was going to go upstairs for a minute.
Oh, I meant with your future, your life.
Well, that's a little hard to say.
Ben.
Excuse me. Mr. McGuire.
Ben.
Mr. McGuire.
Come with me for a minute. I want to talk to you. Excuse us, Joanne.
Of course.
Thank you.
Oh, he is
It's just a friend.
I look at him and I can't believe it. I simply can't believe it.
I just want to say one word to you. Just one word.
Yes, sir.
Are you listening?
Yes, I am.
Plastics.
Exactly how do you mean?
There's a great future in plastics. Think about it. Will you think about it?
Yes, I will.
Enough said. That's a deal.
It's a great clip that many of us know, and it's a clip that's near and dear to me because I didn't have a Mr. McGuire, but I did have a Mr. Kosmiski who nearly said the same thing to me. And I'll just tell you about my journey of how I got into plastics, and maybe we can share some stories together with the 15 minutes we have this afternoon about how each of us entered into the world that we're in today. Mine started out, you can see the Nittany line behind me there at Penn State. I entered Penn State just with a great desire to be an engineer. And Penn State was a great engineering school, and they had a great football team. So the two together sold me. When I got there, I started out in chemical engineering and found it pretty distasteful from the very beginning. And pretty much figured out I didn't want to be a chemical engineer. So I ditched that and went over to the electrical folks because I thought electronics were cool. And I stayed in EE for a couple of semesters and realized I really didn't like electrical engineering. So I ditched that. I went over to industrial engineering, where a friend of mine was who was raving about it all the time. And after one semester in IE, I finally figured out I didn't want to be an engineer. That's really what the problem was. Now, at about this time, you're talking late 77, early 78. I mean, closing in on finishing my second year at Penn State. A friend of mine, Stan Kosmiski, comes up to me, who started out with me in chemical engineering. And he said, Brian, what are you doing these days? And I told him my journey, and he said, plastics. We have a polymer program here that just started at Penn State. You got to check it out. So one of the things Stan did for me, and I'll show you here with a little example, I got to take my background off, is he gave me a book. And this is pre-internet, but I wanted to show you because there's something very special about this book. It's a book called Introduction to Polymer Science and Technology, an SPE textbook, and you can see our logo right there. And back in those days, we referred to books that were great or meant a lot to us or were worthy by their authors. And this book was known as Kaufman and Falsetta. No one called it Introduction to Polymer Science. They all called it Kaufman and Falsetta, but it was an SPE textbook. So in a matter of days, I was introduced to the plastics industry and to SPE at nearly the same time. So upon graduating my undergraduate in polymer science, now remember, in the early days, back then, there were only, I think, 5 undergraduate polymer programs, 6, 7, somewhere in that range that dealt with polymers. I went to graduate school at Penn State, again, also in polymer science, graduated, and went from there to my journey with Dow. Spent an entire career with Dow. Many of you know Dow is a huge plastics organization working in all sorts of areas of plastics, automotive, packaging, insulation, building and construction, electronics, everything. I had a wonderful career. And those words of Mr. McGuire to Ben rang true to me. It was Mr. Kosmiski to Brian. For me, it was plastics. That's how it all started. It's nearly ending now. As you know, I will be transitioning to past president and excited about Jaime Gomez taking the helm because he will make for a fantastic president. And I've transitioned now to an organization called Masterpiece Communications and Consulting, where we're looking at the supply chain in plastics and how plastics in food packaging, food delivery, and pharmaceutical delivery can be more sustainable and more reliable for the customer. So that's my journey in plastics. I wanted to open up, and you can type in the chat window, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, or the Q&A window. If you have any comments about how you were introduced to plastics or some unique feature or time period for you in plastics. And Paul, since you're already on the screen here, maybe I'll put you on the spot. Is there anything you can share with us about your journey or some unique feature of your career?
Yeah, it is definitely a journey. You know, your career is a lot like a river. It starts one direction and you go to school, maybe undergraduate and grad school like I did, and you come out and you think you know what you're going to do, and after about 2 or 3 years doing it, you branch off into yet another direction. So my background is as a chemist, and then as an analytical chemist, I worked on analyzing polymers as well as inorganics. And I hired into a company called AC Sparkplug, which you would think has nothing to do with plastics, but we molded tons of plastics. We make the instrument cluster, the whole front end of GM vehicles at the time because they were part of GM. And not everything always works perfect. So I got to work on many different problems. Moved from there into both thermal sets and thermoplastics, and was a materials engineer for a while. Got to work in quality engineering for a while. Got to work in reliability engineering where I tried to break things, or at least understand what their limits were. And when I was the engineer making the things, I was always not happy with the people breaking them. When I was the guy breaking them, I better understood why and what. And then I moved into manufacturing engineering, and that's a whole different world. And all the secondary processes with plastics. You think you mold this perfect piece of plastics, and often it is a very good and useful item, but often you'll need to join it. You'll need to modify it for the environments it's got or for decorative purposes. And that's where I spent most of my career, but it's been fascinating and a lot of fun. Always exciting though, always something new. So I'll let somebody else move in and tell me how they got into their career in plastics.
So I did get a posting from Bruce Mulholland, and he said after completing his freshman year in Chemie, he started a co-op assignment with Arco Polymers. And I know of Arco, they have a huge office when I was growing up there in the Philadelphia area. That introduced me to plastics, and I've been in the field ever since. If I had not done the co-op assignments with Arco, I never would have been exposed to plastics in the traditional Chemie program at RPI. And you know what? I can echo what you just said there, Bruce, because while I was in Chemie, although albeit not very long, I had no clue what a polymer or a plastic was, nor that there was an opportunity to have a career in that area. So very similar and interesting type of experience. And maybe it speaks to how important it is that we introduce the coming generations to our technology arena and our business arena, right? There are probably many who don't know about the opportunities that we have and that are actually very exciting.
Or I might also add, are afraid of them. A lot of the press in plastics and in chemicals tends to be somewhat negative. People don't realize all the good things they do for us and how important they are to everyday life.
Yep, you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, with the challenges the world is facing right now, we're seeing how many of the wonderful things that our materials do for the world. Anybody else out there have something they could share about something unique in their plastics career or how they were introduced to it? I know it wasn't a commonly known area of study back in the 70s and 80s when I was going through school. A lot of it was word of mouth.
And even now with the schools, there aren't as many that are teaching the practical application, the design, and all the secondary operations. still some excellent work on the base polymers, but not as much as I would like to see. And that's why co-ops are so important. You actually get a chance to use it in a hands-on way.
Yeah, and find out if it really is something for you, because I know my conception of what a job was like in engineering before I entered the program was very different than what I realized it really was. So you're right. Those experiences are invaluable.